felt that this really provided us that more broader view. It did prove to be a more holistic view of what was actually happening in a market because out and about data, for those of you who don't know, captures mobile device data once you're 500 meters away from your home, and we can look at it by how far devices have traveled, how much time they spent out of their home, and this chart, for example, is an example of total population movement. But if you move to the next slide, you'll see that it also looks at it weekday versus weekend. So again, we're getting a bigger picture of what was happening, which is a good story for out of home. Because this data began to show us the new patterns that were emerging as people were changing their behavior because of the lockdowns and the restrictions and then the reopening. So yes, there is a new workday pattern movement. We do see what happens now when there is a temporary lockdown and then we come out of that and we go back in. So this really helped enrich the traffic data that we had been providing. And again, we provided this data on our website for anybody to access and to see. And if you look at the next slide, what's interesting and is really helpful for the out-of-home industry is that I know that I feel like it's almost whiplash with the way we're open, we're closed, we're gray, we're orange, and it just seems to be going back and forth. And what we have found, and this is one example of Toronto, is that consumers or the public doesn't react in that same knee-jerk way. We tend to have established our patterns. We saw, for example, in Montreal that when they introduced a curfew, there was a small drop in the post 8 p.m. hours, but people just then went to the daytime to do things, and that had a bump. So this shows with the latest data what happened over the different lockdown periods. And yep, there was a little drop compared to the prior, in the 100-day lockdown prior to the gray zone, and then it jumped back up again in the March period and really is averaging around 78%. So it's not that dramatic falling off the cliff that we saw last March and April. Certainly as we began to reopen in May, the data was showing that things were increasing and then stabilizing. So I'll move to the next slide. Thank you. Because at Pattison, as I mentioned, we also are the ad representatives of transit across the country. We knew that we had to give advertisers transparency as well as to what was happening with ridership. And also what was happening with the opportunity to see exterior transit advertising, those moving billboards that I mentioned that go through streets and neighborhoods. So again, this pandemic was really interesting in that it forged for us anyways, and I'm sure with my panelists as well, new partnerships with data providers that have nothing to do with advertising. And this is one of those examples. This is aggregated to weekly, although we do see it on a daily basis, but aggregated to weekly. It's transit ridership by transit authority across the country, and you can see what's happening week to week, and we can see when there is some increases happening in ridership. So this has been really helpful data working with the transit app folks to get this. It's not publicly available, so again, it's something that we provide to clients to help them understand what's happening with ridership and how it's trending. The next two slides is step 4 in transparency for the out-of-home industry. And this is a visual representation of what we call, what is GTFS data. So for those of you who don't know, GTFS data is basically the GPS data for every single transit vehicle, whether it's a bus or an LRT train or a streetcar in any transit authority's fleet across the country. And so again, needing to be able to be transparent with clients to let them know whether by a campaign, what they're showing look like in terms of market that they were running in, or even for those advertisers who were perhaps hesitant to consider exterior transit because they thought that the buses weren't on the road. And sure enough, early on, the transit authorities did change their schedules, but then went back to pretty much normal schedules not too long afterwards. So we can pull a snapshot of any 7-day period or 24-hour period and help clients feel confident in the fact that whatever they've purchased on exterior transit, it is in fact live, and that's real-time GPS data by the transit authorities. And then there was one more example. This is just a streetcar example. Thank you. So with all these new developments with transit audience data and real-time GPS data, this new transparency, it was also an opportunity to take it to a next level, again, fueled by the pandemic and having to answer that question. Okay, we see that the buses are on the road and we see that the campaigns are running, but what is the audience delivery? What are the impressions? What is the reach? And so we've partnered with a software development company called Docma, and they developed a planning tool called Sweet Spot. And basically it provides reach curves. And this is really exciting news for moving transit, because what it does is it provides audience impressions as well as uses prism segments. And how it works is that the advertising displays on the outside of the vehicles are polygoned, just like a billboard or a digital board would be. And a view shed is established, and you marry that with the real-time GTFS data that I just showed you in terms of where the buses are passing and when they're passing. And I won't get into all the background information because it gets quite technical, but we're able to now know who by their mobile device ID has been exposed to moving transit, and deliver audience impressions based on that. And what's even, for me, I get excited about is just like we can do with digital outdoor or digital static outdoor, we can retarget those people, those devices that had been exposed to, whether it's a bus mural or a streetcar wrap, with mobile ads in the same way that we can do that with static and digital. And that's something that really wasn't even talked about before the pandemic. So again, kind of accelerated this advancement as a result of that. So an exciting development in that area. So this last area was just what I spoke about when it comes to, other than the hard traffic data and population movement, is what is the receptivity and the recall. And we've seen this in other parts of the world as well, which is encouraging, is that out-of-home recall is actually quite strong during the pandemic. And there's different theories as to why that is. Maybe less going on, so people are able to really absorb and notice. But we've seen strong recall compared to pre-pandemic benchmarks, strong actions taken, as well as I want to say receptivity out of creative, not being annoying, actually being a nice distraction for screen fatigue and people looking up rather than looking down. They've had enough of looking down at their mobile devices. And so it's a positive story for out of home, and that's out there as well to help build that advertiser confidence during the pandemic. And as we, looks like we're going to be exiting this pandemic era very soon. So those are the 5 examples of new levels of transparency that's now reported on a regular basis that became a necessity as a result of the pandemic.
Thanks, Mary. I think it's really interesting, that Montreal example with the curfew that you gave, where it's really just the data is telling us that behavior is shifting, not really the exposure to out of home. It's where I'm exposed to it.
Exactly.
Survey of one, I used to drive into the office. I would see downtown boards. Now I don't. I see more kind of the local and suburban type traffic. You talked a bit about confidence a few times, and I think, particularly in our business, transparency really fuels client and customer confidence. So that's another great thing to see. And I understand the pandemic kind of drove this level of transparency. And was sort of probably the push we needed to transparency. You think it's obviously here to stay at this point?
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, I think we would have got there eventually, but it just maybe would have taken a couple of years versus just a matter of months. It's just amazing how quickly we're able to pivot and focus in on these new developments. So yeah, I'm really excited about these new developments across the board. And expect that it'll just continue to accelerate from here.
Great. Look, I think we can all acknowledge that the pandemic and lockdowns affect different markets, even countries,
Mhm.
you know, sometimes even within a province, just different regions. Can you maybe speak to a little bit how other markets or other countries have adjusted once they kind of start on that road to opening up again?
Sure. Um, so looking to countries that have started to open up again, there's a handful that are very similar to Canada that I like to keep an eye on. Australia being one of them. They're probably the most advanced, maybe 6 months ahead of where we are. But we saw that when they reopened, it really was a snapback to normal behavior. So much so that indoor spaces such as malls, we're seeing audiences reemerge. Public events where they had thousands of people, even the tennis tournament had full stands. So that's encouraging news. Is just that people want to get back to those behaviors that they were doing prior to the pandemic. So there's no reason to think that if the coast isn't clear for us here in Canada, that wouldn't happen. And hearing the news this week, it sounds as if that could even be July in terms of that return. Another place we like to look at is the UK. And they're in the earlier stages of their return to normal, and already they're seeing an increase again in those indoor audiences, such as malls and other place-based venues, as well as increased ridership on their subway system. So that's all really encouraging news for us in Canada. And then finally, looking at the US, what was really interesting observation was that baby boomers were the first uh, age cohort to be 100% or fully vaccinated. And almost immediately, air travel tickets went through the roof, so much so that I just saw this week one of the airlines, and it just slipped who it was. They're recalling all of their laid off pilots and, in fact, hiring more because they just anticipate a big boom. I think a lot of us can't wait to be traveling again. So we continue to look to these other places that are a little bit ahead of us or quite a bit ahead of us to give us some really good insights on what we can expect. And it's interesting, during the pandemic, they were always a little ahead of us for whatever reason, and things were very similar. They had restrictions back and forth, but people had established their regular patterns at that point, their new normal, so to speak. And so there has always been a high proportion of the public out of their homes, whether it was driving for groceries or taking some exercise outside the home. So we weren't hunkered down other than maybe that first period in March and April, and we weren't hibernating. We definitely saw that those countries and in this country, human behavior was very much the same, people wanting to get out.
Yeah, I think look, at the beginning of the pandemic, most of us didn't know what to expect from coronavirus. So obviously an abundance of caution, but hopefully the all clear is coming for Canada soon.
Hmm.
I know I've gotten my first shot. Hopefully everybody's trying to get theirs.
Yeah,
But thanks for that.
thanks.
So we'll shift gears over to Ben at Hivestack. Ben, are you there?
I am here. You got me?
Wonderful. Yeah, I got you.
Awesome.
So thanks for joining us, obviously. And I don't mean to make this all about the pandemic, but another key change as a result of the pandemic was that we saw a surge in programmatic out of home. And it was noted that a great deal of measurement changes and acceleration happened as a result of that. How did that vary for the programmatic space?
Yes, I mean, we're a pretty lucky company in the sense that we're totally global, 20 offices around the world, and we've seen everything kind of come back slowly. To Mary's previous point, Canada has actually bounced back one of the quickest of any country, which is interesting because some of our lockdowns are some of the tightest, which is I think it's due mostly to the measurement we're able to offer. I mean, Pattison was doing an amazing job with their PMX data, ensuring that there's a level of confidence, quelling some of that maybe uncertainty that's involved in the channel. And yeah, I mean, in addition to that, we've seen the programmatic space kind of really explode due to some of that measurement, I think. At Hivestack, we've estimated that the pandemic kind of pushed the evolution to programmatic digital out of home up maybe about 12 months. And in that chaos of the pandemic, a lot of evolution has kind of really been derived. So again, measurement kind of has been at the top of the mountain in terms of what those kind of changing factors have been. And it's not just measurement in the sense of KPIs and buying models and our ability to measure people in store and offline to online and omni-channel experiences. It's really also in the sense of that confidence that we were just talking about. So again, as I mentioned, chaos really drove evolution, and this dashboard we're about to look at was really born out of that. So the first measurement that we thought at Hivestack we really needed to kind of show off and again win back was that confidence of the buyers. So it's very similar to the PMX and Pattison data. We work with almost all of the media owners here in Canada. I think we're at about 35. We have something like 13,000 screens across Canada, and multiple mobile location partners. So in the sense of looking at those two data streams, we were really quickly able to determine, again, as Mary was mentioning, how people were changing their movement patterns, how consumer behaviors were changing, how were consumer habits changing on a day-to-day basis. And I know that video is going very quickly, so maybe we'll show it again as well. But we were able to actually build a platform that was going to give us insights on a daily level, on a weekly level, and also from a mapping level to understand really where consumers were and where they weren't at given times. So of course, winning that confidence was paramount to what we were going to be able to do, to be able to confidently get back into the market. But it was also really important from a planning standpoint to understand, where and when we should be activating. Are there media types that are surging after certain, regulations get lifted or put back in place? And really what we were able to do with this platform is arm the planners and arm our marketers with these, this data in the dashboard so they can make really informed decisions as to the media types, the media owners, and the places they really should be. So of course, this was born out of COVID, which is kind of, like the dark cloud. But what we're seeing is that this is just a planning tool that's going to live forever. We're going to use this to make informed decisions, to optimize our campaigns in real time, and to really, make informed decisions as to where and when we should be showing those really important messages. Of course, with this also came the other big push to programmatic, which was, the ability for us to be agile and to be nimble and to be quick in the market. And I know we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but, with that uncertainty came that, effect that I really want to be able to pull out as things change, or to change media types, or to, shift and pivot on a dime, which I think the platform really, really allowed for. So in addition to the measurement, I think that agility and that, flexibility is really what pushed a lot of our marketers to investing in the platform and programmatic digital out of home this year.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I know from our side, our marketers in every channel are asking for more fluidity, more flexibility, not just because of the pandemic, but the pandemic has definitely accelerated that even more than before. And look, as a digital and data guy from my background, seeing a lot more data and informed decisions in any channel is exciting for me. So, I mean, obviously, you talked a bit about a boost to the campaigns to programmatic digital out of home. Can you talk about some of the success that's meant for clients? Obviously, the dollars have shifted, but is it working?
Yeah, totally. So I think that measurement at the confidence level, at the impression level, at the transparency, level was incredibly important, at least to, again, quell those kind of uncertainties. But then from there, we had some tricks to keep the advertisers invested in the platform and in the space. So I would say that the biggest shift in out of home, at least on the digital side this year, has really been that push from, an upper funnel branding exercise and really thinking about it further down that sales funnel. So I do want to mention though that, out of home is always going to be the best vehicle to reach mass, amounts of people with really sexy and cool imagery. And I think also that, there's this insatiable quench now to get back outside. So this summer, hopefully, when things are back to normal, I think it's absolutely going to be the best channel, whether it's static or digital, to really get those important brand messages out. But at the same time, I think a lot of the things we're able to achieve in the platform are not only incredibly cool, but it's also shining a new light on out of home. And again, really pushing it down that sales funnel a little bit. So the example here, and this is also a little video, I don't know if you can press play there, was looking at a Lactania campaign. And what they were looking to achieve was to actually drive donations over a winter kind of Christmassy holiday period. So what we're able to do in the platform now, as Mary mentioned, with all of this amazing mobile location data, is to really look at, performance from a board standpoint, from a retail standpoint, and from a consumer standpoint, and optimize campaigns in real time. So again, in this video, you can see us clicking on the different screens, looking at different and varying levels of performance in different markets, space, and really optimizing the campaign in real time towards those, performance metrics. So not only are we able to measure it now, but we're also able to optimize towards it. So we're really truly taking these programmatic ideologies of, utilizing data, being smarter and more efficient with our delivery, but then also kind of focusing on that DR, or those performance-based metrics, within the out-of-home space. So I think, again, it's a branding vehicle. We can start to push it further down the sales funnel. So I think that marketers can now think of, out-of-home in an almost a new light, and really think about it a little bit more strategically for different types of campaigns that they might have, and for different types of, KPIs that they're really looking to achieve.
Yeah, I want to be careful not to oversell the lower funnel piece. Just, I think the focus is there these days because marketers still and have always understood the branding power of out-of-home, but these new capabilities in the mid and lower funnel are the pieces that they're trying to understand and how it impacts their brand. So completely agree with you there.
Totally.
In today's landscape, there's obviously some real innovative tactics, especially as you shift to digital and programmatic around, or measurement KPIs, really. Can you maybe talk to us about some innovative things you've seen in that space?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, first and foremost, with almost every campaign, we deploy, we're always utilizing custom audiences. Oh, sorry, this is a different dashboard, but I'll touch on this in a second, I promise. We're always utilizing, custom audiences and mobile location data, as Mary mentioned. So, out of home, as we mentioned, super upper funnel, amazing brand, branding vehicle. But, one of the main issues you might have had with out of home previously was it's definitely a one-to-many channel. So with the ability to target audiences and utilize data and to make more informed decisions, you're taking it from more of a one-to-many channel to one of a select many channel, right? So we're starting to drive further efficiencies with a lot of the things we're doing. And again, audiences are being deployed on about 99% of the campaigns that are launching live on our platform. The biggest shift we've seen this year by far is probably one of the most exciting, but also one of the trickiest, is dynamic creative being utilized. So typically and historically in the platform, we started off with raw assets, JPEGs, GIFs, .move, Shockwave going back in the day. We started to move towards running fast tags and getting a little bit smarter. And now we've kind of come full circle to true proper DCO. So, our platform has the ability to, utilize and deploy HTML tags, and within these tags is, just to kind of explain the background, is a background image, perhaps a container tag on top, and the ability to dynamically feed that add anything, right? It could be location. You could walk down and see a TSA that says, hey, Parkdale, right? We see those all the time, and those are actually now being fed completely dynamically. They could be jackpot triggers. We've just launched a campaign for pollen triggers for high allergy seasons and stuff. So this has kind of been the coolest thing. It's kind of been the holy grail we've been looking for, and we've been working really closely with all of our partners to ensure that this kind of works seamlessly across all of our media owners. But this is definitely kind of the biggest shift that we've seen. And then finally, the measurement piece, right? So we're looking at a dashboard here. This is looking at brand lift study. So actually looking at, upper funnel metrics, again, not always focusing on those performance-based metrics or those DR kind of KPIs, but actually looking at, device IDs that we targeted versus a baseline group, and seeing if we actually drove any, ad recall, or did we change the brand opinion? For some government campaigns, we were looking at, did we potentially drive people to download the COVID alert app, and were they going to be advocates of the messaging they saw? So I think also thinking about measurement from an upper funnel standpoint is also incredibly important, so we have some tangible kind of outcomes on our hand. And then finally, with that measurement, and Jeff, I know you told me not to get too far down the funnel, we've also kind of changed the methodology of how people are purchasing out of home. So if you look historically, we're purchasing on GRPs and reach frequency, which are still incredibly important. We've kind of moved towards buying on a CPM and the digital side of things a little bit more. But anyways, what we're starting to see now is people kind of purchase on potentially all the way down the sales funnel. So a cost per incremental visitor, or a cost per app download even. And I know Jen's going to touch on this with some exciting stuff that she did, but the change in measurement has also changed the way we purchase the actual media itself.
Yeah, love it. Appreciate the time, Ben. Thanks, Ben. I just realized I was on mute. It's only been a year. MC, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me properly?
I can hear you perfectly. So, I mean, the first two panelists really shared, Ben and Mary talked a lot about, the granularity in the data that's available to us and how we're using it to potentially buy differently or measure differently. Audience targeting capabilities have grown over the last couple of years, but definitely probably accelerated more than ever in the last 12 to 18 months. What data sources are available in the market right now to help you build those audiences that Ben talked about? And how does audience targeting work for out of home for someone like me who may not be living and breathing it like you are?
The behind the scenes of it all.
Yeah.
So as you know, Astral being part of the Bell family, we have access to first-party data. So of course, we are using GeoMobile data that we talked in length today, but we're able on top of that to layer in first-party data. Most of you probably have heard by now of SAM, that is our strategic audience management tool. SAM feeds into our 10 million mobile Bell Mobility mobile devices and 3 million Fibe TV households across Canada. And that gives us access to a lot of data points that we're able to layer on top of the GeoMobile data. So before I get into all of the data points that we have access to, it's really important that I touch on privacy, because I'm about to show you all of the information and layers that we're able to access. But of course, keep in mind that all of the data that I'm about to talk about is aggregated and anonymized. It's super important that we never are able to identify any individuals, even within the platform. Whenever we create a segment, what we do basically is we collect IDs that we put together of devices that have the same characteristic. But when we create these segments, we have a set minimum so that we cannot drill down so much that we have so few devices included that we couldn't identify individuals. So that's another layer of protection. And of course, we're also audited by a third-party partner to ensure the integrity of our data. So now that I've mentioned that, we can go on the next slide to showcase. Oh, there's one missing, but that's okay. The slide I was supposed to showcase here was all of the data points. So I'll just speak to it. So the data points that we have access to, here it is. So all of these data points that we have access to, thanks to the first-party data, are, as I mentioned before, combining the mobility data to the household data. So on the mobility side, we now have access to the app usage and the mobile online usage. So what this gives us access to is the websites that people recently visited on their devices. So we have the GeoMobile data that tells us, okay, where do people go physically? And that tells me about who they are. But on top of that, I can layer their online behaviors. What websites have they visited recently? And that came in pretty handy, especially in the pandemic, because when everything was shut down, when the non-essential businesses were closed, if we wanted to identify people who went to the gym or visited the dealership, we had to go further back before everything closed. So the data was available, but a little bit older. When we turn to online behaviors, we have the data right now. We can look at last week, last month, depending on the look back window that we're hoping to have. So that was really useful. On the household side of things, we have access to set-top box now. So if we want to identify people who watched certain shows or watched certain live events, like certain sports events, that's doable also. I don't know why is it just me? Yeah, thank you, sorry. Again, because sports events, gatherings are not allowed, we can turn to, okay, well, in that case, let me turn to people who watch the hockey or watch live sporting events to create a segment. So all of these data points basically are fed into our data processing tool, and then in the end, it provides a targeting segment. So if we go on the slide about the auto intender, I just wanted to explain it with an example. So if we're trying to reach auto intenders, the way that we would combine both data The geomobile data would be the offline behavior. So we want to identify people who visited dealerships, for example. And it was mentioned before, the look back window, we said past 30 days, but that's really flexible. We can adjust it based on your client's needs. And then we can layer on top of that the online behavior, so the websites that were visited recently. And that combination also can be and or. So basically, I can say, depending on how I want to qualify my audience, do I want people who both visited online and visited the dealership? Or do I want people who visited online and maybe, but not necessarily together, the dealership? So we can play with that and in the end create really the audience that meets our client needs.
So look, we all understand the branding power of out of home. I think it's interesting, you know, when you combine that online and offline behavior, you get really powerful, more qualified audiences. The challenge we always have in Canada is scale sometimes. So you have to kind of balance. There's a bit of art and science to it, I think.
Exactly.
What you can do with data and what you can do with a marketing campaign. So, you know, as we move beyond impressions and start to measure real business outcomes, like if we're able to measure them before they come onto the dealership lot, we can measure them after they've been exposed and arrive on the lot. Can you maybe talk a bit about how out of home can offer online and offline attribution? And does this only apply to digital out of home, or can it be static as well?
Exactly. I know Ben touched on it, so I'll maybe explain again the behind the scenes of it all. So if we go back to the data path of everything. So basically, whenever we create a segment, we match it then to a GPS location. So basically, whenever we create an audience for out of home, we have a bunch of devices, and then we look at where they travel. And then I don't know if we can go back to the slide with the data path. When we match it to the GPS location, we look at where they travel. And historically, when audience data was introduced to out of home, it was mostly available in programmatic. And it obviously still is available in programmatic. And the advantage of programmatic, to Ben's point, is that the creative will follow the audience throughout the day from 1 hour to the other. But now we're also able to take that data and just ingest it differently, but activate it on a standard static campaign. So the way to do that would be, instead of looking at the consumer traveling patterns from 1 hour to the next, we will look at the traveling patterns for 1 week to the other. So throughout the week, which roads are they taking? Which locations are they visiting? And that's how we are able to create some sort of an indexing list and pick boards that over-index towards that audience for a whole week instead of hour by hour. So that's how we activate it for static buy. We mentioned it before, we can layer on top of that mobile retargeting. And because the device is at the heart of it all, when we create the audience and then we look at where it travels, and then we detect, thanks to the polygons that Mary was talking about earlier, devices that were exposed to out of home, who's stopping us from continuing to track them after being exposed and then measuring how many of them visited a store or visited a website? And that's when the online and offline attribution comes in. So for offline, we talked a bit about more, but basically we create polygons for all of the locations that we want to measure. And we measure the devices that were exposed to out of home and then to the points of locations. It can be a store, a dealership, or anything with a physical address we can do. For online, there are many different ways of doing it. One way that we like to put forward is combining out of home with mobile retargeting. Because mobile advertising is able to track click rates, we're able to tie it to out of home. And I'll explain it here. So basically, if we do a campaign, a mobile advertising campaign, and we track the website visits, well, then we know, okay, my mobile campaign drove that certain amount of traffic to my website. If we create a control group within that mobile advertising campaign, we can say, okay, these are the ones who were only exposed to mobile. These are the ones who were exposed to mobile and out of home. Is there a lift between the two? If so, that's the lift and the contribution that out of home brought to the online visits. So you see, we always push it further to see how can we attribute online visits to out of home. And now it was mentioned also, app downloads is something that we can measure also, because app downloads are linked to a device ID. So if we're provided the devices that download the app after being exposed, that's how we can link the two.
Great. You know, all this talk about polygons, I never thought I'd actually use my high school geometry class, but here we are. You know, you work closely with COMMB, so, you know, COMMB announced it was moving forward with new out-of-home audience measurement and planning initiative. Can you maybe provide some more details around that and how this will impact measurement and planning and when it will be launched?
Mm-hmm. So the goal today is not to explain everything. COMMB are obviously the expert, but I wanted to put on everybody's radar that they did announce a new methodology, and it just goes to the transparency that we were all talking about earlier. COMMB felt that they needed to update their methodology to include all of that new data that we have access to. So it will, you see all of the data points. So they keep what they had already, but they will add on top of that the location data, the audience data. So all of that now within the COMMB measurement tool will be available. So hopefully it will be launched by the end of the year, but with the current context, we never know. But I invite you to keep an eye out for any COMMB communication coming up in the upcoming months. They will provide training and all of the details on that new methodology.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm gonna switch over to Jen. Jen, are you there?
I am here.
Wonderful. I can hear you crystal clear. Love it.
Awesome.
So let's talk about trends for a second. You know, what projections or projects are there kind of in the near future with out of home?
Yeah, I think there's actually you know, a lot going on in this space that has also been going on. You know, while this pandemic has been happening, a lot of companies have been, you know, really investing in different strategies to grow things, especially in the area of development of digital out of home. You know, that will also then increase the demand and use of automation platforms like programmatic. So we've definitely seen those things go hand in hand. You know, we talked a lot about attribution here, and I know we will continue to evolve our attribution needs and wants as we look to get like a more granular understanding of the actions that are taken after exposure. And, you know, we did touch on top versus lower funnel activities, and out of home will continue to play in those spaces, especially when you talk about mobile retargeting and how data can play into that. But I think that we also really need to fully understand what that, you know, the impact of the cookieless world is, and the use of the mobile IDs, the iOS 14, you know, how that is going to change, you know, how we use the data for indexing and retargeting. And, you know, we've talked a lot about this in the digital space in terms of like online and web digital. We haven't yet really, I think clearly as an industry, thought about the incomes and or outcomes of it from a mobile retargeting on programmatic and digital out of home campaigns. So that's something that we will start to see more conversation around as we move into the back half of this year. And we talked about it earlier too, you know, is seeing the demand for more flexibility in out of home. So the shortening and removal of cancellation terms, you know, sort of moving away from those decades old 90 and 120-day terms, really focused on, you know, the support of you know, older static campaigns where we had a lot of printing and posting needs, where, you know, now digital demand has really changed that need for flexibility. And we're seeing a shifting of a more traditional business to one that is a bit more digital led. So, you know, led by the impact of those digital trends to allow for more flexibility. And I think that goes to what Ben was talking about earlier with the drive for you know, the programmatic during this pandemic. We really saw the increased appetite for that because of the ability to provide more flexibility.
Yeah, I think, you know, when the pandemic first hit and the traffic patterns that we talked about changed, I think the ability for clients to almost follow the audience a bit was probably something that they enjoyed of the capabilities of digital and programmatic. You know, I'm going to ask you a tough question. Put on your prognostication hat. What do you think in store for the next 3 to 5 years? And if you get it right, I would like the lottery numbers for tonight, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank God Amazon is still delivering, because my crystal ball arrived late last night. I looked deep into it, got the lottery numbers for you. I will just post them in a minute. But you know what, in all honesty, I actually think out of home, which, look, I remember studying out of home in like my university history of advertising class. It's one of the oldest mediums, broadcast mediums out there. So, it's been around forever. It's been, fairly consistent forever, but I think it's actually experiencing a bit of a renaissance right now, which is really being led by, digital out of home and contextual out of home, like indoor spaces such as elevators and resto bars. We're seeing big investments by like major media companies. Think about Rogers' acquisition of Rouge last year, and that goes to show the value of out of home plus publisher content, as well as the application of like, really rich data that MC touched upon. Think about that first party and mobility data and geomobile. We have to think about how that could impact how we plan out of home as we, maybe move away from traditional planning tools such as FSA data and, more census and historical data. We're also going to see some major, I think, non-traditional industries or companies make moves in this space. So think about like what's happening at Loblaws Media. They've got a ton of rich data. They've got a huge amount of real estate. They're very likely to introduce digital out of home screens into stores soon. And with that, using their data to target shoppers to create more personal out of home experiences, from a whole CPG point of view, or, the food industry, how can you really impact instant decisions by offering a digital coupon tied to your optimum right there in the store? So those digital out of home and out of home experiences in general become much more contextual and much more personalized. And I think we're also going to see this, continued investment in digital from static conversions. You've got these, huge amount of or legacy static placements in really high traffic areas, and we're going to start to see the companies convert those more. It's a high margin business. It easily integrates into an omni-channel strategy, so it's really good for marketers. And so this is where I think in the next 3 to 5 years we'll see that the number of digital screens in Canada, which I think represents like 8 or 9% now, grow consistently to mirror much more of what a real digital universe is going to look like.
Great. Yeah. I think one of the things you touched on there is personal experiences. And we need to keep in mind that the digital device is not going to make the board a personal experience, but we can use the board to create a personal experience on the device. And I think that's really important to kind of keep in mind. So, I mean, in the end, is this going to mean that the industry is going to plateau, regress? I mean, I obviously think it's going to grow with all this pent up demand of people dying to get out of their houses. But maybe talk a bit about that.
Yeah, it better grow. No, I actually, it will continue to grow, but that growth is going to come. That growth will also come from, it'll come from putting more sticks in the ground and more faces in really relevant and contextual spaces. But it will also come because it will continue to evolve. I think a few of the things we have to remember is that we're still a growing country, right? So we're going to see obviously an increase in the amount of digital out of home faces at the cost of static, conversions. Where do you have a, it's where you have a static face, you can easily implement a digital face, means one less person going out to change creative. It means, the printing and posting costs disappeared. It is a great opportunity. So that digital conversion will continue, which I've touched on, but we also have construction booms that have removed a lot of really valuable inner city faces and static faces and murals. But that's coming at the boon of highway faces that have huge reach. These big, large digital faces, sort of, what like we have here at All Vision, that have an incredible amount of reach. And those will replace, where we've lost those key assets in the city. And we're also going to see, more of that indoor space become more personalized and contextual. We also have a population that's growing. Urban centers, both large and small, have really been impacted by this pandemic, especially. We're going to see a huge amount of growth when next census data comes out talking about Kitchener, Waterloo, Barrie, areas like that around Toronto. We're going to see a huge amount of growth there. And out-of-home companies will continue to grow in those markets as well, because brands still need to make sure that they can reach consumers in those areas, and out-of-home will continue to support that, and I think really serve as a valuable tool for marketers.
Awesome. This is going to be a bit of a selfish, shameless plug for Nikki's team and your team as well. For growth, you need to innovate and think differently. And Ben talked a bit about earlier, new kind of models or new trading models is something we try to talk to clients a lot about. Can you maybe share an example of a new way of thinking or a new kind of buying model for out of home?
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you go to the next slide. So last year we were approached by the Starbucks team at Spark, looking for a way to sort of look at attribution and out of home a little differently. They had a holiday campaign that had a really strong brand and product focus, really trying to get people in store to purchase the holiday product. And it included a strong call to action to go in store. So with that, they asked us if we could cost out a digital out-of-home campaign based on visits. And not only just a visit, but a cost per incremental visit, or a CPIV. So knowing that our faces and proximity, the reach of our faces and the proximity to Starbucks stores, we were comfortable giving them a target of $1.50 per visit. I think that's quite aggressive, but I'm glad that we did that. Working with Hivestack, we were able to really execute the campaign programmatically, across our inventory, but we were also able to work with them to develop a really cool way to model the CPIV, or the cost per incremental visit, and to deliver Starbucks and the Spark team a 77 cent CPIV. So we beat the target by almost double, which is amazing. We had a target of 50,000 store visits. We wanted to make sure that we would generate that. We were confident that we could do that. We generated over 97,000 in-store visits, and these are modeled incremental visits. It worked tremendously well. Needless to say that the Spark and Apex team and Allvision, Hivestack, all four of us were really, really pleased with it. But it also highlighted some other great takeaways. The first being that digital at home, we know, is a really valuable upper funnel tool, but it is also a really valuable tool for driving action. And in this case, we used faces that were highway and bridge faces. So this isn't even just proximity targeting within a short radius to a location. This is using high reach highway faces that drove people to take actions in local stores, local communities. So the value of the value of having that proximity target, obviously, that last action that you can see before you go into stores, very important, but also being able to use a high reach face can drive equitable, if not better, results. Some of the other things that we resonated that came through the Spark team was the capabilities right now to track in-store visits and opportunities via Facebook and Google platforms are diminishing because their product offerings are changing. So we were able to use out-of-home here to model that CPIV, and that's a massive win. A very traditional media with some newer data trends and data applications on it. We were able to beat out what we used to use, or as an industry have used for a long time, Facebook and Google to model for us. And that's really important in the face of data privacy changes and how new tracking challenges are presented by, things like iOS 14. So, the industry should know that there are a lot of other touch points at their fingertips to model this data and to get results. And the last thing that was really done via Hivestack, and which I think is really important, it's a really cool feature that we can use through them, is that ability to integrate retargeting to social platforms. Through the Hivestack platform. Mobile ID collection is an incredibly valuable tool for digital out-of-home campaigns, but then retargeting onto social, where we know, an incredibly qualified audience was a really valuable part of this campaign and the retargeting that went into it. So all in all, really, really pleased with the results of this. It's a campaign that we're going to play into again with them. So they are repeating it. I think that, Spark and Hivestack and Starbucks, we're all really pleased with this, and we're happy to do this again.
Yeah, I can tell you internally, this is viewed as a very, very great case. I sound like Donald Trump there. It's a great case, and it really speaks to the partnership we have with you guys and how we're kind of taking that medium that I think you said it earlier is possibly the oldest medium since they've been doing cave drawings in the world, and I really see the out-of-home industry making a serious effort to reinvent itself and be a channel that that is a huge part of our marketing campaigns going forward. So thanks for that, Jen. Nikki, do we want to move on to questions from the audience? I know I've got a couple extra questions that we'd gotten in emails earlier that I could throw at the panelists. How do we want to do that? I've got the chat open so I can see if someone asks a question.
Yeah, a lot. I forwarded to you all of the questions that have come in so far. So you can start with those, and then by all means, if there's more questions, guys, just go ahead and toss them in the chat, and we'll keep answering as many as possible.
Yeah, sounds good. I think one of you panelists, one of you fine panelists, talked a bit about flexibility and cancellation, and obviously, unfortunately, in our market, the government restrictions are inconsistent, is how I'll describe it. So maybe if one of you could kind of talk about, that flexibility within the government kind of opening, closing, opening, particularly for marketers that are potentially in retail. Do you want to talk a bit about cancellation policies and flexibility, not only just during the pandemic, but is that kind of flexibility here to stay?
I mean, I touched on it earlier. I think that for some cases, yes, it is here to stay. I mean, as an industry through this, I think all of us, no matter what platform and we've worked on, we've all had to be really responsive. We understand that there are these incredible ups and downs, and they're tough for both agencies and brands. I mean, they're tough for us as well. It's universal. We really are all in this together. I think though the most important thing though is wanting to make sure that our clients and agencies and brands feel confident that we'll respond to their needs, especially when lockdowns result in things like their stores being closed, right? So to shift, to a curbside or not even any curbside model can be really dangerous to a brand that then still has their creative up and running, and can create a really negative experience. So I think we've had to be really, mindful of that. I think the digital terms have probably shifted across the board for good. When it comes to static printing and posting, I think there's always going to be challenges there where scheduling comes into play. So how that's managed moving forward, I think will be maybe different by vendor, but digital will definitely see an impact, and a lot of that driven by programmatic too, and how that offers low risk opportunities.
Awesome. That actually tees up the next question. And Ben, I'm probably going to throw this one to you. So, we have a question here that says, how does programmatic differ than a digital only campaign? Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it differs, I think, because we can utilize a lot of the data. I would say that the gap is slowly bridging as a lot of the capabilities are starting to get built into the CMS players or built into the ad server-based delivery that all of these guys have on hand, which is great because all that means is we're being a little bit smarter. We're definitely being more efficient. And I think we can start to do some cooler stuff. Like, I never thought I'd work in out of home, to be entirely honest. I'm a programmatic guy through and through. And I remember out of home used to be so cool and big and 3D, and you're driving down the Gardner, oh my God, this thing's moving. And I think that, the data play can sometimes get a bit maybe dull, right? It's just targeting the same people, right time, all this kind of stuff. So I think what we can do in the programmatic space that's a little bit different, and maybe we can start to move this direction, is a lot of that dynamic based stuff we talked about, utilizing time of day, right? Like think about southbound in the morning giving a message and northbound on the way out as people are commuting and giving a different type of message and playing with that data and all those triggers you can do. But in terms of just digital versus static or digital versus programmatic, that gap is definitely bridging as all of these amazing vendors have been doing a great job of utilizing the best data that's out there.
Okay, great. You're kind of touching on dynamic creative as well there. So maybe can you talk a bit about how that might be utilized other than, I mean, you correctly talked about like whether it be weather or day parting or directional. Are there other ways that we can use dynamic creative in out of home?
Yeah, I definitely think, static did a great job of being very directional, right? You know exactly where it is. The corner is on. You can speak to directions. I think the dynamic creative gives us a lot of those location-based opportunities, whether it be a street, a community, a direction. As we mentioned, we just did a campaign for a pollen trigger. I thought that was really cool, looking at pollen areas in certain communities and speaking to, allergy season. Sports triggers have been around forever. Truly, if there's an API or an RSS feed, you can really utilize that now. So please get creative, right? Don't just put out, hey, I want an 18 plus, maybe in market auto. Think about where you are, when it is, how hot it is, the product, and of course the media type as well, right? Really being contextual, as Jen mentioned, with the media type, really plays to that one-on-one experience that out of home can really give you.
Great, thanks. The next question I can see on the list here, maybe Mary or MC or anyone can actually weigh in. But obviously there's that shift to digital, but how did programmatic and digital help strengthen static, and how do they kind of work symbiotically or work together to kind of raise all boats? Anyone want to try and tackle that one?
Sure, I can jump in. You mentioned it also, the combination of top funnel, middle funnel. So I think that's where both come into play. If you have your branding awareness and you want to have reach and you want to include many different formats, that's when your traditional type buys come in. And then if you want to have part of your buy more targeted, to have the one-to-many to one-to more selective many. I don't know how you played it earlier, but I thought that was really good. Then they complement each other so that you really have your from top to middle funnel, and they complement each other. I don't think, no offense to programmatic, I don't think we will ever switch to 100% programmatic because static is such an important part. But I'm obviously a very, very big fan of programmatic. So I think the place of programmatic will increase, and then we'll have a balance between the two.
I'm just reading some questions in the side, but I agree. Like a lot of the talk today was about kind of that mid and lower funnel because of all the new capabilities. But we need to remember, out of home lives. It can really carry a customer through the entire journey, which I think makes it a really powerful medium where it used to only live in the upper part of the funnel. I see RC has asked, we touched upon a lot of digital programmatic and the growth. However, there's still a lot of appetite for many to play in static. How do you see that traditional format growing within the next 2 to 5 years? Or would you say it's dying? I don't think it's dying, but
no, I would say having both digital and static and all the different forms of static. Somebody mentioned it earlier. Contextual placement has always been a big part of out of home, and that's going to really come into effect when we lose a third-party cookie. So the fact that you have all of these different formats, whether it's digital or out of home, they complement each other. And I would just recommend out of home plans have that mix and look towards contextual placement. Also using that mix of high impact formats versus maybe more of your easily digestible, more one-on-one formats as well. So I don't think that any medium is dying. In fact, during the pandemic, what we saw early on was that our local advertisers, clients really wanted to be local and on static billboards. They wanted to say that they were open or that they had new services, and they wanted that frequency that static gives, that constant exposure, and the same with the buses. So no, I don't think any of it is dying. In fact, with all the new technologies that are coming along and the ability to kind of do the attribution and provide those audience insights, it just strengthens the whole out of home offering.
Yeah, I think there's a couple points there. Isel just threw in static equals 100% share of voice. So that's something that the clients are actually have a real good appetite for. So that's good. The other is, I think you talked a bit about like the local businesses start to step up and get into out of home with the kind of push to shop local. It created an entire new opportunity for them to leverage this channel to kind of reinforce that shop local and let people know that they're a business in their community and drive sales there when they were open. So I think it's definitely, I'm sure there's some regulations too in terms of whether you can put up digital boards versus static boards. So I don't see it going away anytime soon. And I think we talked about how it kind of helps push everybody through the entire funnel. We talked a lot about data, and I see a question up there about the Apple opt-in change. Does that have any impact on how we measure and some of the data that we talked about today?
Yeah, I could probably speak to that. I'm probably uniquely qualified for that. And Ed, we got so close. It was like 120. It was going to be everything happy. Data's fine. Now, this is obviously the tough question we have to answer on our side. The way that I've been thinking about it, it's almost like three-pronged. I would say the first thing is, of course, it's going to deteriorate some of the data, but of course, the app experience is also going to deteriorate. So I think it's really alarming right now. A lot of clients will be opting out. We're going to see a precipitous drop. But a lot of these apps require location data to operate and to really work well. So we think that there's going to be a bit of a bounce back there. Of course, this is only affecting Apple products as well. So, a lot of what we're doing is modeled. As MC mentioned, we're not, targeting individual devices. So with that modeling nature, the Google and the Android devices that we have on hand are still going to be incredibly important to do what we do. And then finally, you really need to make sure you're working with partners that are open, right? So at least our platform, we have completely open APIs, and we're consistently looking at things around the corners, whether that's going to be Trade Desk's Unified ID 2.0, hashed emails. I mean, you've read all about all of these things that are going to be out there. Of course, vendors like Bell obviously have their unique first-party data and their PII-based data that they're going to have on hand, but also being really open to what's around the corner, because we always know that there's going to be some level of tracking that's going to be done. So I think it's kind of that three-pronged, or those kind of three different pillars that we should look at it.
And I would add also, of course, at the beginning, when you're offered to opt out, yes, people will. But then just as with anything regarding privacy, they opt out, and then a few weeks later, they say, you know what, it's not that bad. Let me opt in again because I want to enhance my experience either within the app or whatever. So long term, I don't think it will affect us hugely.
Yeah, I think the thing you have to remember about the opt-out, it doesn't mean ads are going away. It just means relevant ads are going to go away. And to your point, MC, it's going to erode the customer's experience. And Ben, you talked a bit about, iOS is really, it's limited to Apple devices. I hear great things about Samsung. I don't see any other questions, and I looked at the list that we kind of had collected from the email, and I think we've covered a lot of those in the conversation today. I mean, I'll give it another couple of seconds in the chat if somebody had a burning question for the panelists here. I'm going to take silence as time to move on. But I think that brings us to the end. I see Isel laughing hysterically on mute. So I want to thank, first of all, the panelists. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for that, guys. And, being on a panel and then the Q&A is always a bit of a wild ride. So I appreciate you sticking with us and answering some of those questions. And I know Isel mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that there will be a prize for one of the clients that is on the business or on the call. And I think they'll follow up in email with the details on that. So with that, I think I'm going to close it off, Nikki, unless you give me a thumbs down. Thumbs up. All right. We're going to put 10 minutes back in everybody's calendar. And I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank everyone for being here and have a great weekend.